If you are thinking about buying or selling in Weston, Florida, let me save you from one very common mistake: looking at one number and deciding you understand the entire market. Because Weston is not a one number market. And if you're buying and selling at the same time, congratulations. You have chosen one of the most exciting forms of financial gymnastics known to humanity. You sell one house while trying to buy another one. You watch interest rates, inventory, inspections, appraisals, closing dates, and somehow you are still expected to sleep at night. So, let's talk about what is actually happening in Weston right now. The July 2026 numbers are interesting. According to the latest RPR data for Weston single-family homes, there is approximately 4.78 months of inventory. That is down about 2% from the previous month and down a very significant 27% from a year ago. And that tells me something important. Weston is not drowning in inventory. In fact, inventory has tightened considerably compared with last year. At the same time, this is not 2021 either. Buyers are not standing outside a house with 20 other people, waving increasingly ridiculous offers at the seller and offering to name their firstborn after the listing agent. Today's buyer has choices, but the good homes are still getting attention. In July, Weston had 75 new listings, with a median list price of about $900,000. The median price of active listings was approximately $1.13 million. And here is where things get interesting. The median sold price was about $1.075 million, up approximately 10% from the previous month. That is a pretty impressive monthly move. But I would not take that number and immediately announce that Weston prices are going up 10% every month. Please don't do that. Real estate does not work like your favorite stock app. One month can be influenced by the mix of homes that actually closed. If more expensive properties sell in one month, the median can jump. If more entry-level properties close the following month, it can come back down. That is why I always tell my clients, don't just ask, what is the median price? Ask, what happened to homes like mine? That is the question that actually matters. And Weston is particularly interesting because the city has a very specific buyer profile. This is a master-planned community with beautiful landscaping, parks, waterways, bike paths, strong schools, gated communities, and a very polished suburban lifestyle. Basically, Weston is what happens when somebody says, I want Florida, but can we please keep everything extremely organized? And people are willing to pay for that. Weston also has something that many South Florida communities don't have, in quite the same way: consistency. You don't just buy four walls and a roof. You are buying the neighborhood, the schools, the landscaping, the amenities, the lifestyle, and frankly, the feeling that somebody is going to complain if your hedge grows 3 inches too high. For many buyers, that is actually a feature. Now let's talk about time. The median days on market for new pending listings in the RPR data is about 40 days. For sold properties, the median is approximately 32 days, and that number has improved by about 9% compared with the previous month. Translation: a correctly priced home can still move, but correctly priced is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Because there is a huge difference between pricing a home based on what you want to make and pricing it based on what today's buyers are actually willing to pay. I know, very inconvenient. Sellers sometimes say, but my neighbor sold for this. Wonderful. When did your neighbor sell? What condition was the house in? What was the lot? What renovations did they have? What did the buyer negotiate? What were the competing homes? And what happened with the appraisal? Because your neighbor's sale is not automatically your home's value. The market does not care about your mortgage balance, your renovation budget, or how much you love the kitchen backsplash. Sorry. Now, the RPR numbers show Weston homes selling at approximately 95.45% of list price. That is another very important number. It means buyers are negotiating. So if you are selling, don't confuse a lower inventory environment with unlimited pricing power. You still have to be realistic. The market can give you leverage, but it will not give you a magic wand. And buyers, this is where you need to pay attention. Weston may look expensive, but the market is not simply pay whatever the seller wants. The broader data also shows that buyers are negotiating below asking price in many cases, and other market sources show that Weston has been taking longer to sell than the crazy pandemic years. That is actually good news, because a normal market gives you something that the 2021 market did not give you: time to think. You can inspect, you can compare, you can negotiate. You can look at another house without feeling like it will disappear from the planet in 7 minutes. But if you find the right house, don't confuse more negotiating power with "I can wait forever." The best properties are still the best properties. And when a home is beautifully maintained, correctly priced, in the right location, and has the features buyers want, it can move much faster than the citywide average. Now let's talk about the biggest challenge for people who want to sell and buy at the same time: timing. This is where strategy becomes much more important than simply putting a "for sale" sign in the yard. You need to know what your current home is realistically worth. You need to understand how much equity you actually have. You need to know what your next purchase is likely to cost. You need to understand your financing options. And you need a plan for what happens if your home sells before you find the next one. Or the opposite: what happens if you buy before your current home sells? That is not a small detail. That is the part where people suddenly start drinking more coffee. And this is exactly why I don't believe in treating every real estate transaction like a standard transaction. If you are selling and buying simultaneously, the two transactions have to be planned together. Your listing price affects your timing. Your timing affects your purchase. Your purchase affects your financing. Your financing affects your negotiating power. Everything is connected. And Weston is a market where that strategy really matters. Because this is not simply about finding a house. You are choosing among different neighborhoods, price points, school zones, property types, HOA structures, lot sizes, renovations, and resale potential. And two homes that look similar on Zillow can have completely different values once you look underneath the hood. That is why I always want to see the actual comparable sales, not just an automated estimate on a website. An algorithm can tell you a number. A good realtor should be able to explain why that number makes sense, where it doesn't, and what the market is actually telling you. So what is my takeaway from the July Weston market? I would call it a selective market. Sellers still have an advantage from the relatively tight inventory, but they don't have unlimited pricing power. Buyers have more negotiating room than they did during the pandemic frenzy, but the best homes still deserve serious attention. And if you are doing both, selling and buying, you absolutely need a strategy before you put the first house on the market. Because the goal isn't simply to sell your house, and the goal isn't simply to buy another one. The goal is to get from house number 1 to house number 2 without losing your mind, your negotiating power, or your retirement account in the process. That is where I come in. If you're considering buying, selling, or doing the famous Florida real estate two-step in Weston, let's talk before you make a move. I'll help you look at the actual numbers, the comparable sales, the inventory, the timing, and the strategy, not just the pretty pictures online. Because in real estate, pretty pictures are nice. Numbers pay the bills, and knowing what those numbers actually mean can save you a lot more money than the cost of a good realtor